But yeah, I listen. I'll play the Brad Holmes thing, and then we'll get into our reaction to what he said. He went into a lot of things. We'll dive into it. He talked about acquiring another star edge. He talked about Aiden Hutchinson's extension, the draft class a little bit, some of the new coaches. So let's play this clip. I believe it's from, I want to make sure, Richard Silva of the Detroit News. So credit to him for this clip. He was there in Indy. Let's take a listen to what Brad had to say here.
Opportunities to see what the market is. Yeah, it's look, it's like I told you guys, it's hard. It's not a lot of those guys available. Like, I say, so we lost a star pass rusher, right? Well, just because you lose a star pass rusher, there's not but so many in the league, anyways. And so, just because we lost a star pass rusher due to injury, that doesn't mean that other teams are going to say, hey, we have a star pass rusher. I know you lost one, but we have one. Would you like to have this one? No, that's a star pass rusher for that team, and they're trying to win games. So, and it's not just a trade deadline. It's, free agency and during the year. Like, those guys are hard to find. That's why it's called a premium position. But yeah, it's those guys are hard to acquire, and it's hard to keep them financially. Again, we have one that's due for an extension, and we've already kind of gotten to the planning stages about him already. And so when you talk about adding another one, it's like, well, all right, can you financially add another one because you want to add the other one on top of everything else that you have?
Okay, so I mean, we have another clip here talking about more of getting another edge rusher, but he said it in there. The clip that I played had the Aiden Hutchinson comment in there because that was his main point. Is like, we already have a dude we're going to pay. To have two of them is going to be hard. So let's play this clip, and then I'll give my thoughts on that.
Yeah,
we'll react to it. But yeah, this is on our Crunch Time account. Brad Holmes talking about the one player away, adding another edge. I love this, by the way. Him answering. This is right from the horse's mouth. Let's take a listen.
Like, why not 2 or 3? Or
shout out to Doc.
Shout out to
exactly.
the Doc.
That's my point. Is look, yes, I mean, in seriousness, but also transparently letting you know, like, look, we're not just looking for one high-end rusher. Well, we have a high-end rusher now. We want to have another one, yes, but we'd like to have 3 or 4 high-end rushers. But that's just not always the reality of what you're able to do. So it's definitely not being ignored. Look, I want to say all the conversations that I have with GMs, throughout the year when we're bouncing off each other, what you need or what we need to improve our roster. I can't remember a time where pass rushers ever been omitted. I mean, that's what everybody wants that. So, it's not going to be ignored. I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's the one player away. I think I've been pretty clear about that part because
So yeah, he talked about the one player away thing. How ideally in an ideal world he would like to have multiple edge rushers. Like, again, all the things, and he reiterated today too how much he values the trenches. I love hearing him say that. Just like reminding people, like, hey, I value the trenches. Fun fact. I think most people should know this, but Brad Holmes, former defensive lineman, he values the trenches. He understands the importance of that.
Yeah.
Now, to react to his comment about Myles Garrett, I understand it. Like, it's going to be hard to pay everyone and get Myles Garrett. I do. The premise I was going off of is, hey, listen, you got a roster that is primed right now. It's a very, very good roster. We've talked about it before. We all agree you're going to get Aiden back. You have you have defensive pieces, probably a question mark at cornerback. We're going to see what they do there. But on offense, they got all the pieces. There is a window. Now, when you have a good GM that can draft well, he extends the window. But there's no doubt. I mean, I would just disagree with anyone that thinks there's no window. There's always a window. It's when your players are the cheapest and they're playing their best ball, or at least at a very high level. And the Lions have a ton of dudes that are playing at a high level that are making in comparison to what they should be, pennies.
Yeah.
So when you have a window like that with cheap, really good players, that's your time to be more aggressive, to try and really win that thing, win the Super Bowl, because at some point that bill is going to be due, and you're going to have to pay a Kirby, like they will, or an Aiden, who will probably be the highest defensive player paid in the NFL. You're going to have to pay a Brian Branch. You already have Goff's contract kicking in. Oh, yeah, you have Amon-Ra, Penei Sewell. Like, it's just hard. And then you get restricted in free agency to really do anything. You sign cheap deals, guys, flyer deals, and you're looking for immediate impact from the draft, which can happen. But my point is to maximize the roster, you got to be a little aggressive. Now, does it mean just Myles Garrett? No. It can mean, another player via trade, or it can mean free agency. We've talked about guys on the edge that we really like in free agency that aren't expensive but still are pretty good players. It can come in different ways. But that's where I'm coming from with this. Like, I still think the Lions need to apply pressure and stop doing, and I don't think Brad will, but the Marcus Davenports that you've always hated, Klotzy, like those type of deals, you got to start getting just dudes. Maybe not Myles.
Yeah,
dudes.
There's like levels to it for sure. And I think like the biggest thing too, it was at the end of that video, Brad said it, and he says, hey, like the edge rusher position, it'll never be ignored. And he's like, and he said it today, like he's very aware that they need to figure that out. And I think he knows it, they know it, and they're looking into every single option. And that was like today, there was a whole situation with the Myles Garrett. Is that whole saga over? Is it because he did say at the end of it, he goes, probably not, when asked if the money would work for that, or if it would work with Myles Garrett. He goes, probably not. But does that mean like, hey, all of these options are done? No. Like, I think Brad, the opening statement of that whole thing was, obviously he was a little sarcastic, saying I would love 1, 2, 3, 4 elite and star pass rushers. But then he carries on to go like to say, hey, like this is something I'm very aware of, that I need to get someone else in here with Aiden Hutchinson. So it's not something that he's ignoring. He knows it. It felt like today when Brad makes those comments, and we had the back and forth today, but like when Brad makes those comments, say probably not, just based off Myles Garrett, like that doesn't mean another high end or another pass rusher or a Josh Sweat or these guys. Like that doesn't mean all of these are completely out of the picture. I think Brad is good enough as a GM to say, hey, I'm going to take a look at every single person and I'm going to figure this out. I'm sure he's reached out to Cleveland about Myles Garrett. And if he's doing that, guess what? That means he's going to find a way to figure out the books for it. Just because he said, hey, it might not work, doesn't mean he can't find a way to make it work. And it's the same thing with all that. Now, I'll say this too, and I'm sure everyone will agree with me on this. The easiest way and the most realistic thing for it to happen, like situation to happen this offseason to fix the pass rush, is you opt into Zadarius Smith. You keep Zadarius Smith, and at 28 overall, you or even if you want to and trade up, you go get another edge rusher to go with Zadarius Smith. Like that is the most obvious and probably the easiest situation and way to go about this offseason and approaching on adding another edge rusher. Am I wrong? Like that's like number one to me. Now I think there's these dream scenarios and these one-offs of the Myles Garrett, the Josh Sweats, the Khalil Max, like all these other players where you're like, hey, I'm sure Brad's doing his homework and he's going to try and figure those out and see if that makes sense. But again, there is all the money aspects to it, Jeff. I do agree with you to where if you're able to find a way to get that done this year to add one of those elite guys across from Hutch, is it very unlikely? Highly unlikely? Yes, it is. Like, I think everyone knows that. But like all these people who are like, hey, it's done. Like, to our point, I think to what we all try and say here on this show, and you guys have your own opinions, but in my opinion, you still have to take a look. Because if he does get that done, that's a game changer. And if he can figure that out, that's a game changer. Those aren't just things where you just go, that's a pipeline dream. Well, never happened. So you just think Brad just never going to look at pipeline dreams? No, like consider it. Look at it. Does it make sense? If it doesn't, okay, we move on. But we're still going to look at it. And I think that's kind of the sense of Brad. I'm not going to say I'm all the way out on the I'll say I'm not all the way out on the Myles Garrett stuff. Like I think Brad's keeping his cards very close to him. And I think whether it's the Myles Garrett stuff or some of these really high-end free agents that he might have an opportunity to get, then that's where I think it's like, okay, he's still working. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate this. The obvious and easiest choice is drafting an edge rusher. That's why we've been talking about it for the last 2 weeks. And all of our mock drafts have edge rushers in the first 2 rounds, but most likely. is because we know that's probably the easiest way out. Not that sounds bad, doesn't it? That's the easiest way and the best way to go about it. But there are these pipe dreams of trying to find different ways to do it that aren't as realistic. That's where I think people have to understand a little bit.
And I share a lot of the same things you were saying, Boone. My thing is, when you talk about Brad Holmes saying it's hard to get, I can understand with the Myles Garrett because there's only so many Myles Garretts in the world. If you're any GM, you're very unlikely to give up that player. I still think there's some chance with Myles Garrett, but very unlikely. The part that frustrates me when Brad says that, because he is doubling down a lot through that, he understands how important edge rushers is okay, now we're in free agency. Who have you really acquired at the edge rushing position through your tenure here? The notable one last year, like if we just take a look at last year, this is why it bothers me a little bit when he says this. Last year, the Lions are coming off an NFC Championship game. Defense was an issue. Aiden Hutchinson was healthy, but you could still see you needed another presence on the other side of it. In your division, this is where I say these things are not hard to do. The Minnesota Vikings acquired Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Greenard. Both of those guys had 10 sacks. Alex Van Ginkel was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and Alex Van Ginkel really didn't even get paid a bag. You watched Danielle Hunter go from the Vikings to the Texans. Again, I'm not going to be too mad at that because that's a lot of money. We know that Brad showed interest, but then even guys like you look at Leonard Floyd had 8.5 sacks for the San Francisco 49ers. I'm not saying that Leonard Floyd would be the answer, but you could have damn sure signed Leonard Floyd and Marcus Davenport, and you still could have acquired Zadarius Smith at the trade deadline. So his just lack of inability is what concerns me because you look at how aggressive he's truly been in free agency at that edge rushing spot. I mean, the man hasn't left first gear. Like I think the aggressiveness to actually go from plan A of wanting to acquire a free agent to plan B and landing these free agents is different. You have to start paying for what you're getting. There's no more of these 1 year, $6.5 million deals and try to get to the Super Bowl with that. How many Super Bowl rosters have done that? I'm not saying you have to go get a Myles Garrett, just like you're saying, Boone, but we're seeing names like Joey Bosa very well could get cut. Harold Landry could very well get cut. Go get a legitimate option to start off that rotation. If you don't do that and you're just going to try to get a bargain, well, you're going to try to get a bargain and it's not going to turn out to production because how many of these bargains in free agency have truly panned out to be exactly what you wanted? I would say the closest one is probably Carlton Davis, but look what happened. Hurt. And it was a bargain. He's a good player, but when you need him most, hurt. So he's got to pay for what he wants.
Reader.
He's done with the days of being cheap. I'm not saying go out there and start throwing bags because at the end of the day, Brad's not going to be doing that. But like right here, Brad is the frugal goat. Howie Roseman's not frugal. Les Snead isn't frugal. John Lynch isn't frugal. All the winning GMs in football are the last thing from frugal. The Detroit Lions are not rebuilding anymore. They are here. So start spending money like the contending teams do. If you look at all the dynasties, what do quarterbacks constantly have to do?
Yeah.
Take pay cuts, take pay cuts, take pay cuts because they're maxing out on star talent. They're not trying to be like, let's save 30. Let's save 20. And I understand you have to see the upcoming contract with Aiden Hutchinson, but let's stop acting like they have no money to spend this offseason because sometimes it feels like that with the Detroit Lions. He doesn't have to go out there and get an all-pro, but get a guy that can actually do something that's proven, not coming off an injury.
All right. I'm just going to, one thing you said, Klotz, I can't remember the exact word you said, but you basically said, like, the terminology you used sounded like you're like, Brad's terrible at this. I can't remember the exact words. We'll have to go back. I disagree with that. Like, I agree with your, but like, listen, like, this is, okay. This is like turning into like a Brad Holmes, like, pitchfork type of thing. Like, that's not what this is. Like, no. I don't want, That's what that sounded like a little bit. There was a word used in there
at the defensive end.
Okay, at that point. Okay, at that point, because you started naming guys like, well, like that. This is where like the point has to be reiterated a little bit more, and because like you say all these, and then you go, the only good one is Carlton Davis. Well, no, like he's brought in DJ Reader, Alex Angel. Like there has been pieces he's brought in. David Montgomery, Kevin Zeitler. Like Brad has done unbelievable building this team. Like Klotz. I know that the rant, I love it, but like it has to be known. Brad's done a great job. I think this year, like going into this last year was the first year that they're competing for a Super Bowl. So like he gets a little bit of slack from me because you see some of these teams like Howie Roseman, who has been in that building for how long? How long? Jeff, I see you shaking your head. Can you name that? How long?
15 plus years.
No,
yes.
Howie Roseman.
Howie Roseman. How long has the 49ers GM been there? How long has the Chiefs
He's
GM
been there since like John Lynch, like 2018.
And they've helped build it, right? And they've been in those spots. This last year was the first year where the Lions really, now you can make the argument they were that one edge rusher away. They were this one piece away. Were they really? I don't know. Like this last year, Jeff, I know you went on the rant with Brad and all that, but like they had a million injuries on defense. Whether they would have made a move at the trade, like they made a move at the trade deadline. Like, yes, I get it. You look back in hindsight, you look, oh, well, if they would have added more depth in the defensive line, those injuries wouldn't have really mattered. Like, no, it probably would have caught up to you. It would have caught up to you. And I think this, again, I'm going to reiterate this a million times this offseason. This is the offseason where Brad, we saw what he did last year. He knows. Like, he knows. You need to go figure out a way to go get edges. Like, and at the same time, there's no excuses. Like, yes, there's money to be spent based off of the contracts that are due. But you still have to find a way, just like Howie Roseman and all these GMs do, to balance it out and say we could still pay our guys, but we can still bring guys in to help win football games. And that's where the balance has to be. And I think this offseason is the biggest for Brad Holmes to be like, hey, I can do this as well. Like I can build a team, but 2, I can sustain the success, and 3, I can go win a Super Bowl and kind of build up that roster in the depth. Because it's hard for me to like really just go at Brad over the last 12 months in hindsight, because he has brought in great free agents. He has built the team, not just out of the draft, but also free agency. It's just the nitpicking of the one edge rusher or the Marcus Davenport signing instead of getting to Jonathan Greenard or one of these other guys. Like that's it. But if he has this summer to figure it out. And I think he knows that. And I think there are people who want to have these big takes and be like, Brad sucks at this point. Like, no, he really doesn't. It's just, there's just one problem that he has, and it's fixing this edge room. And once he gets this defensive line, like if this defense is healthy, you're good. Once this defense is healthy and you add another piece to it, you're good. Like that's, I think, where people are kind of starting to veer off a little bit. And I will give a little bit of grace to Brad Holmes instead of just trying to be like, oh, no. Like, no, like he has built an unbelievable roster besides this one sliver.
I think that's what Klotz was saying, though. If you were talking about the edge position, he's not talking about the roster.
And when, just so I can clarify.
Yeah, but you got to be more specific because you start bringing up the other players.
When I brought up, for example, the other players, those were defensive ends that were signed outside of Daniil Hunter for not that they weren't that much money, and they were productive. And
I'm not talking about those players. You didn't listen to what I'm saying. You brought up Carlton Davis.
Let me react. You just talk. Let me react.
But you're saying the wrong thing. I'm going to tell you when you're saying the wrong thing.
When I bring up Carlton Davis, what I'm saying is those risky bargains. David Montgomery was not a risk. Alex Anzalone was not a risk. DJ Reader is not a risk. Kevin Zeitler is not a risk. Carlton Davis is a risk. Emmanuel Mosley is a risk. Marcus Davenport is a risk. And look at where those are at. The positions of need for this defense over the last couple of seasons, corner and defensive end. He's added some real pieces like Amik Robertson, but at the end of the day, he was a 3-year, 19, 16, somewhere in between that. He was not a risk. Like there's no injury concern. You're not asking him to be your cornerback 1. You knew that he was going to be a rotational type of guy. My problem is when you trade for Carlton Davis, expecting him to be your cornerback 1, I don't think that's a true solidified option because you know he's going to get hurt and he's older. Marcus Davenport. That's where I'm coming from. I agree with you 1,000%, Boone, that Brad Holmes has built this team in a great way. Brad Holmes is an elite GM. All I was doing was shining that light on the issues because I do think like Brad Holmes is a great GM, but these are the things that have to be figured out, in my opinion, to win a Super Bowl rather than talking about getting there.
Yeah, I mean, this, and I've said this when I ranted about the Brad Holmes stuff, is like, I don't think I even have to say like Brad's a great, like that's already a known thing. Like we shouldn't even have to like remind people like we love Brad. Like that's not like it should be known he's a great GM. But there are things you can say, like you the Davenport the Flyer thing, and whether you want to give him grace or not, Boone, that's fine. Like we don't have to argue about that. I don't even look at the injuries. I think it's unfair. If I'm going to say, well, I didn't like the Davenport signing, like, well, it didn't matter. There was not you, but if someone were to say, like, it doesn't matter, there was injuries. I'm like, I don't care about the injuries. I'm talking about the actual signing. I still have a problem with it, despite the injuries. Like, I don't think that was ever. We already knew how that was going to end. So I think I agree. We all agree with you what you said. Yeah. This offseason is big. Whether we did whatever, we can bicker about the past, whatever. But moving forward, we all agree, like, no more Davenports. No more, flyers.
Emmanuel Mosley.
Yeah,
I think it's just more so like, again, it's the
The guy's
position
a great
group.
GM.
It's
He's
the
a great-
position group. Like it's the man's hit. Like let's say there's 10 position groups. He's hit and built that 8 out of the 10 position groups.
Hey, what's going on there? It's Jeff Iafrate. Appreciate you for finishing the video. You can check out one of the videos here suggested or show support by commenting, liking, and subscribing. And buy your merchandise, officialctsports.com.